Hundreds of Israeli police are being deployed around a holy site in Bethlehem ahead of a pilgrimage there this weekend. The authorities are concerned after a month of violence in the country in which some 60 people have been killed. Last night, the so-called Middle East Quartet, that's the UN, the US, EU and Russia, called for calm and restraint. This evening, thousands are expected to gather at a spot in Bethlehem said to be the burial place of the Hebrew matriarch Rachel. Kevin Connolly says it'll be a reminder, should one be needed, that in the Middle East the past is still very much alive today.
My evening walk takes an hour and a bit if I'm honest, but the backdrop took more than 2,000 years to assemble. At every historical high water mark, new builders left their signatures. There are churches that fly the saltire of Scotland and the banner of the papacy, and buildings under the flags of the Greek and Armenian patriarchs. The Star of David, of course, is everywhere. In times of heightened tension, lots of Israelis fly it on miniature plastic flagpoles that clip on their car windows. You would generally look in vain for the Palestinian flag, of course. Jerusalem is under Israeli control, and control of Jerusalem is not shared. History is not a thing of the past here. It's unfinished business, as nagging and persistent as an unresolved chord. The triumphs and disasters of the past are as real as the tensions of the present if you know where to look. Even the British, eternally torn between the desire to have an empire and the desire to have an empire on the cheap, left some kind of mark. My route is the route followed by the British Army of General Edmund Allenby when he conquered Jerusalem in 1917. Allenby got off his horse and walked through the gates of the old city, a touching gesture of humility to all things ancient and sacred, and a deliberate contrast to the German Kaiser Wilhelm, who had a hole knocked through the 16th century walls to save him getting out of his carriage in 1898. British rule lasted more than 30 years in the Holy Land, and yet it might have had its finest moment in those first 5 minutes. The British left in 1948, leaving the Arab Kingdom of Jordan in control of East Jerusalem and the Old City, and West Jerusalem in Israeli hands. The route I follow crosses what was then an edgy and dangerous DMZ, a demilitarized zone across which Israel and the Arab world contemplated each other in mutual hostility. The ancient backdrop didn't change, of course. The skyline was still dominated by the Ottoman Turks' magnificent defensive walls, the Kaiser's hole having long since been repaired, of course. But the tensions and hatreds and incompatible territorial ambitions of the modern world swirled dangerously around those walls. In the War of 1967, Israel crossed the DMZ and drove the Jordanians out of the Old City and out of East Jerusalem. Victory brought the holy places, the Christian Church of the Holy Sepulchre, the Jewish Western Wall, and the Islamic Al-Aqsa compound under Israeli control, where they remain to this day. And, indirectly, it led to the construction of a new wall along the route I follow just over a week ago. That's because the victory of 1967 brought the Arab population of East Jerusalem and dozens of outlying villages which had belonged to Jordan under Israeli military occupation, and there's a turning to one of those villages that leads off my road. Now, suddenly, as Jerusalem endures a sharp upturn in violent incidents, a new wall has sprung up there. It's nothing compared to the walls the Turks left, of course. Just 3 heavy blocks of concrete designed to slow cars to a crawl on the way in and the way out as they pass an Israeli checkpoint. Here, as elsewhere, the Holy City is wholly divided. On the Palestinian side of that divide, there is a long-running, slow-burning sense of resentment at the humiliations of occupation. People are angry that having never asked to live under Israeli control, they pay the same local taxes as Israelis and feel they don't receive the same services in return. The latest wave of violence brings sharper resentments to the surface too. The readiness with which Israel's security forces resort to lethal force against Palestinians, and the sense that restrictions on movement are a form of collective punishment. On the Israeli side of the barrier, there is an overwhelming appetite for strong security measures. The random, spontaneous nature of the stabbing attacks has left many Israelis feeling that any Palestinian passing on the street could be a potential attacker, a sense that has given daily life here an edgy, fearful feeling. The attacks and the uncompromising security response and the darkening atmosphere are a cycle. No one knows if it will darken further or when the light might return. My guess is that the ugly temporary wall will be gone sooner rather than later, but for now it joins a host of more permanent and more elegant relics of the past, as a reminder of how history throws a long shadow here, even on a short walk.
Kevin Connolly in Jerusalem.